Okay, so then when this starts, we just have to turn off the
sound on YouTube, not on us, right?
Randy, I just noticed we have you twice. I'm looking to see who's all in, and I see you close up, and then I see you with the group. Hi, John.
Because I'll be presenting, that's why.
Makes sense.
Any feedback? Okay, just so everyone knows that's joining, we did already go live because we wanted to make sure it worked. So you're on YouTube currently.
Do you need to record?
You don't need to record. No, it records. Okay,
Just
thank you.
message me if you need something.
Okay.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
You're welcome.
I know that Cole was gonna be absent today. And Chris Larson was dealing with, oh, he's here,
Yep.
okay. I know he has some bus stuff going on, so.
Brenna, other than Cole, was there anyone else that was going to be absent today that you know of?
Nope, that's the only one I heard from
Okay.
specifically, so.
About meatballs or sorry.
Meatballs sound great, Mike.
talking
Meatballs
about,
sound wonderful.
My wife's on the phone here. We're talking about dinner plans. So this meeting.
Are we all invited?
We're
'Cause that
coming
sounds
over.
Great.
Meatballs, spaghetti and meatballs, everybody? Yeah.
What time's dinner, Mike? We'll all be there.
Depends how efficient we are here today.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Keep it moving.
Okay, just looking to see, are we waiting for anyone else, Brenna? I don't know if Lisa, did we hear from Lisa?
I did not hear from Lisa or Steve Holland. Is he on yet? I can't see him, I don't think so.
I don't see Steve Holland. I do see Steve Hall.
How many do we have?
Well, let's give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Feel the pressure's on. Chair for my first meeting and we're running late already. Sorry. Just want to make sure everybody who's going to be here though is on the call.
There's Steve.
Okay.
There's Steve.
Yep.
I think we're good now.
I think it was.
Is Lisa?
Perfect.
Oh, Lisa isn't, I guess, yeah.
Okay, but sometimes she comes up.
Okay, well, it is 3:02, so we're going to call the meeting to order, the Board of Trustees. If you had an opportunity to look at the agenda, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thanks, Brennan. Is there a second?
This is Mike, second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve. I'm going to do the approvals a little bit different. If there's an objection, say aye. Otherwise, we will accept it as approved. So is there any objection to the consent agenda? All right, motion carried. Before we start the meeting, I would like to have everyone, or I shouldn't say start the meeting, before we get into the official operations piece, I'd like to introduce our two new board members, Chris Larson with Milner School District and Sonia Larson with Kidder School District. If you both can just say hello and share a little bit about yourselves, that would be great. Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Chris Larson. I'm the superintendent of Milner Public Schools, Milner, North Dakota. I don't really know what you want to know. I know a little bit about what I'm doing here. I expect to not know anything just a couple minutes as you get going. So I'll do the best I can to keep up.
Well, welcome.
I'm Sonia Larson with the Kidder County School District. We've been on NDPHIT. This is going on our second year now. And so I've gotten to know a few of the people that deal with it, and I'm excited to learn more and help out where I can.
Great. Well, we're excited to have you both on the board. Mike, did you say something?
We just made a joke. It's good to have the Larsons.
Yeah. Well, what I will say, this board is, I would say it's a very comfortable board. Don't ever be afraid to ask questions. I think it's very important, particularly because, you know, we are a smaller board and it's a new entity from the standpoint of we're only a couple of years old. And so a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of things that are going on. And so if you have any questions or aren't sure about anything, please know that this is an open forum. And you should feel comfortable and confident to be able to ask those questions. So welcome aboard. And with that, we need to discuss an election of a vice chair. It's not as scary as it sounds. So if anyone is interested in serving on that, in that position, or if you'd like to nominate someone to serve in that position, I will take nominations now. Not everyone at once, please.
Looking at the length of the terms remaining and involvement in the trust, Mike, if you're up for it, I would nominate you as chairperson-elect.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
All right, are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? I think you have to say it 3 times. I think that's Robert's rules, right? Are there any other nominations? All right, so nominations cease. We have a motion on the floor to accept Mike as our vice chair. All those opposed signify by saying nay. Mike? You drew the short stick. You're in. Welcome as the vice chair.
I was just about to go with Steve Holland, so.
We'll put him on deck.
Right? Yeah. It's not so bad. I don't know. Brennan made it pretty easy for me, so I'll do my best to try to make it easy for you as well, Mike. Okay. All right, so getting into the operational update of our agenda, the renewal of the NDIRF policy, general liability policy. So when we started the trust, we obviously needed a general liability policy for our board and the trust. And I think it's more of an operational thing, but since it is the Insurance Reserve Fund, you are a board member, it's more of a transparency thing, just making sure that everyone's aware that we would like to move forward with renewing that general liability policy unless there's any objection from board members. I think we're all members of NDPHIT anyway, so we're all in the family. Okay, so Brenna, I would say that we can continue to move forward then in renewing our policy for our general liability through the Insurance Reserve Fund.
Okay, great.
Next item on the agenda is Remedy RX contract terms and updates. For our new board members, I just want to give a brief overview of this and then turn it over to Randy to fill in more of the details. So we are exploring a contract with Remedy RX. In simple terms, what they do is they do a complete review of our prescription drug costs as a whole in the trust that are billed through our insurance. And then they verify that the amount of the pharmaceuticals or pharmacy drugs that are being charged are accurate. If there is discrepancies, they work with the carriers to reconcile those accounts, and then fees and rebates are still under negotiation. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy to give us an update on where we are in that process and what that is looking like.
Yes, thank you. So we had, after the last board meeting, we went back and asked for a copy of the contract so that we could verify all the terms and conditions that they wanted to have us adhere to relative to the percentage of savings. And one of the things that came out of it was that they asked us if in fact they validated the savings and how much leverage do we have against the payer. Well, I think that was a question we all had as it relates to the process of it. And we indicated that at this point in time, we are unable to carve out pharmacy Prime Therapeutics, in this case, from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so that created a unique discussion as to saying, well, we don't have leverage. Then it's really, can we go to Blue Cross and let them know this is what we are doing, but have them enter essentially under agreement that allows that contract, if there are identified savings to exist that come through the remedy analysis, would they ensure that that credit is given back to the group? Well, we had that discussion yesterday, as a matter of fact, with Blue Cross Blue Shield, because we met with them in person and had their majority of their executive team there. I'll just make a couple of commentary to it. One is it seemed to me, because it also involved the rebate discussion, as we talked about that as well. I think that the way that Blue Cross does their relationship with Prime Therapeutics is at least even from the leadership team, they're not, I don't think they understand really the detail of their structure. Not that they don't know that the rates or how the rebates apply to groups, but these type of, it almost, I felt like they kind of caught them off guard to even know how to answer the question. And not that, that they don't want to figure out how to work with this on it. They just were unclear. John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was pretty clear to me and John. So we said, look, here's that what we'd like to do is sit down with you and go through all the mechanics of this process, and so that because in our opinion, they're a user, or really Prime Therapeutics is a contracted vendor for Blue Cross. Even though they're part of the Blues Association, there are certain Blues that don't use Prime Therapeutics. In fact, there's a lot of them. So it is by contract that they're actually entered into with the same relationship. Then subsequent to that, John and I were discussing, and we reached out to Remedy and said, look, how about you enter into an agreement with Blue Cross Blue Shield that you can represent all of our groups, and effectively do the same thing. Each group would get their own applicable savings analysis, but it may make it easier to implement and scale, because it's not necessarily for one unique group. However, that doesn't mean we won't do the unique group with NDPHIT. We were just thinking it may be just a operational function that we might be able to accomplish. So bottom line is, Remedy is just, they have to have that piece in place, or we have to have an agreement in place with Blue Cross to ensure that the savings, when they're identified, come back to the group. So we have a scheduled, or we're scheduling another follow-up based on yesterday's meeting to work out the details. So that's where we're at this point.
So Randy, is Blue Cross Blue Shield amenable to using Remedy RX, or do they want to continue with Prime Therapeutics?
Well, Prime still will be in play. You
Okay.
think about it as like they use this software that they do that we'll be speaking today. It's called the Payment Integrity Plan, okay, which they go and reprice the claims using an engine to look at the procedure codes that the providers are billing for, and then they take part of the savings. Remember that we shared that before, that Payment Integrity, they're keeping 30% of the savings. Remedy's operating the same way, except it is analyzing Prime Therapeutics. So Remedy's like the payment engine that looks at all the analytics and verifies the contractual terms of it. And given the fact that they know how that program works, I'm pretty confident. Well, they were not opposed to it. First of all, they did not say, no, we're not interested in that. I think they just don't understand well enough. And that's why we said, well, let's actually go through the detail.
So are they looking, sorry, I just am not quite sure I'm grasping the piece of Remedy RX. So I know we're looking at it to do for our trust, but is Blue Cross Blue Shield actually looking at it as an umbrella
Oh, no,
for all?
no, so
Okay,
I apologize, I conflated those two issues. We went to them with the whole purpose of having NDPHIT do it, but after the questions they asked, my thought was, well, why not figure out a way that we can make this applicable to some of our other groups that are with Blue Cross? Because we have several, of course, but that doesn't mean we want to deteriorate our focus. It just means, can we get more leverage that they would, intensify their interest to make sure that they would give it the resources required to actually do it.
and so then what are next steps now that you've met
Next
with
steps
them?
are, we're setting up a meeting with Remedy RX and Blue Cross. So the Remedy people can explain the entire process and give them an example how it works. So that they can see what the requirement on the process part is to give access to the data elements necessary to push through the analytic engine that Remedy has. And then how they produce the report and show the savings structure, and then how it's identified as, okay, this is something that Prime Therapeutics actually has to refund back to the employer, and NDPHIT in this case.
I think an important background to that too is just the idea that Blue Cross historically has not allowed these contracts to be carved out. I mean, Randy alluded to that.
Yeah, that's the whole point, is that normally we can take it, and if we said, no, we don't want to do that, then we could say, well, we're just going to, if you don't agree to it, we'll carve out, you use it as leverage to help them realize, hey, we could lose the entire pharmacy component. And it's not, just so you know, self-funded groups typically do unbundle stop loss and pharmacy from the carrier. It just so happens we're with the carrier and they require it by contract. It's all one.
So, and that's been the case for, decades, but I would say that Blue Cross has demonstrated a willingness to adjust with the market, and at least on other contract terms that we've discussed with them. So I think we're optimistic, at least, about having the discussion that is something that could be a great benefit to the NDPHIT members going forward.
Yeah. So our steps are, sorry.
No, I was going to say, on Remedy RX either needs to have an agreement in place before they move forward, obviously. Wasn't there something that we were going to have them look into, or was it like looking at the claims history and they had no interest in that until they had an agreement?
Well, that's what it is. So in effect, so right now, I'll give another example. We get all of your data to our Springbuck and our Plan IT reporting engine, but it all comes from Blue Cross, but it's a four-way agreement. NDPHIT signed it, Blue Cross signed it, we signed it, and it's the same process. We'd have to have a similar agreement in place to basically make sure that they're adhering, like I said, to the discovery of the savings.
And just to reiterate, if we do this contract with Remedy RX, are they looking to charge a base fee to provide this service, or is their fee coming out of the savings or the corrections, if you will, of the prescription drugs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As I shared with you last week, that if they don't have that leverage, then it's like, well, we will charge a fee because we don't know what our projected savings are going to be. But that's the reason why we're trying to avoid all that. We don't want to have any fee. We just want it strictly based on the identifiable savings in a shared arrangement.
And they're willing to look at that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've had email communications over the past few days, even as today, after our meeting with Blue Cross. So that's why I say our next effort is to get a meeting with Blue Cross and Remedy and go through the whole process.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a work in process, but it's I was encouraged by yesterday's meeting with Blue Cross that they are completely open to the discussion.
Great. Board members, do you have any questions for Randy in regards to Remedy RX? Okay, well, you did a great job explaining that. Next agenda item is mental health parity, and I believe that is memo 1 that was in your attachment. So NDPHIT has a few plans a few in the January renewal dates, and then there's a number of schools in October where their plans are out of compliance with mental health parity, and more or less what that means from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in the plans that there's a disparity in coverage between mental health services and physical health services. And so the plans have to be in compliance. And unfortunately, and Brenna, I may be wrong on this, but I think SEEK wasn't informed about this disparity until after the January plans had already were already in place moving forward. And so SEEK is working with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Brown to revise the plans to be in compliance. And, you know, we also don't want them to be jeopardizing their current coverage that they have in their grandfathered plan, if you will. So I know that they're working on trying to get them in compliance, but also make sure that their benefits are very similar, if not the same. And I know they're looking at an April 1st date in getting those rolled over into a more into a compliant plan. And then for the schools in October, they're allowing us to stay on the plans that they currently have. And then at their renewal date in October, they'll be moving over to those new plans. But just to make the board aware, NDPHIT does hold that liability for non-compliance of those plans through October. So knock on wood, the insurance department doesn't want to do an audit for us, but I think that because we're making a concerted effort in correcting those plans and making those changes, I think that we would have some grace period in order to do that. But so it will be a few months before we can get everybody in compliance. But I know that Randy's been working with Blue Cross Blue Shield to try to get those plans as consistent as possible. And I believe that there was a handout on kind of the comparative of those two plans. Is there anything else you want to add on that, Brenna or Randy?
I think they're still working on even better plans.
Yeah, so what it is, just to give you a little bit more background, it's a federal law. That's the requirement. And Blue Cross was not in compliance with the plan, and they admitted their failure to essentially notify us timely. And so no matter what, if you're with Blue Cross Direct or if you're with NDPHIT, it doesn't matter. Everybody's going to have to be required to the mental health parity rules. So in context, that's important. It's not like there was something omitted or not known. It's just that they're in charge of the filing process with the Department of Insurance, and they notify us to ensure the compliance to all the federal and state laws. Well, like I said, they failed to do that. And so then they came back with some plans that said, okay, here's what we would like to release it with. And we said, well, not so fast, because that creates a liability on the member. So we went to them last week or the week before and said, we need to get more aligned so the member does not bear the responsibility of cost out of pocket, or as close as you can to the parity of the current plan they have, so it doesn't happen. So that's what they're working on right now to come back and tell us. So we hopefully will have some comparatives that we can run up against on our actuarial value plan design structure within the next couple of weeks.
And the process to be able to roll that over, are you looking at doing another open enrollment then, right, for those January plans?
You have to get a 60-day notice to employees, and it's a plan change, and the federal law says employees are entitled to the 60-day notice.
Board members, do you have any questions in regards to the mental health parity and the adjustment in those plans for either the January or October?
I do, Jenny, Randy, so the guidance regarding this is coming from Blue Cross Blue Shield, or is this coming from our attorney?
Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Okay. And we're certain that NDPHIT would be subject to it, even though because we're not subject to ERISA, are we?
No, not ERISA. It's actually, it's a federal, it has to do with the mental health parity law that applies to whether you're ERISA or a public entity.
Okay.
And so, yes, and what they had done and just kind of omitted is that they got the Department of Insurance in North Dakota to give them a kind of a waiver, if you would, and for, you know, a period of time and that's why the October groups, they're effectively saying those we're going to extend out till the October. But for the January groups, that's not in play, and therefore they gave us notice like 2 weeks before January that we had to change them all after the open enrollment was done.
So really it would have been a non-issue had Blue Cross informed us prior to.
And we had plenty of time to do the communication and the change.
Yeah, but we also need to evaluate the actual actuarial differences between the plans, and that's part of what we're requesting from Blue Cross, is that they share that methodology with us so that we can evaluate any other risk impacts to the trust.
And so Blue Cross Blue Shield has the liability, and then they're trying to pass that off to NDPHIT. That's how that works?
Well, that's gone back and forth, honestly. Because we basically, we wanted them to put everything in writing to us, and we haven't got that yet. But no, so here's the kind of what Jenny said is that in terms of making sure the plans, now that we know from the regulators, it's the idea, well, are you making the effort to ensure that you get compliant with the parity law and the plan design? And that's what we're doing. We'll have those plans all lined up and then create the communication process, then go to the groups to let them know this is the compliance. And it's the federal law that they'll be compliant to for that.
But Blue Cross has admitted that they take a shared liability in the process.
But they haven't put that in writing yet.
But, well, yeah.
So whose responsibility was this to make sure that we had this mental health parity? Was it Blue Cross Blue Shields or was it ours? Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're the filing entity. Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to figure out how that works then liability wise. If we don't have an agreement with them regarding that, how would that all play out?
Well, that's what we asked for. We said, put that in writing to us, exactly how that's good, because we don't, this went several calls where we're saying, and we want you to put this in writing, exactly what you're doing. And but we understand that we've got to do our part now to put it out there and get it changed. We got that. But we don't want to be holding any liability in the interim.
Right. Do we know what that liability is? I mean, is there a fine structure or how does that work?
Yeah, and Stephanie, I don't know if you got that information in front of you, but it's basically a compliance to a plan design. And I think it would probably more or less manifest itself that there was a complaint that a member was essentially affected by the fact that the parity did not exist.
So it's the Department of Labor that would identify the error in an audit process, and it would be the Department of Labor that would assess the fines. And because NDPHIT is a self-funded plan and is the plan sponsor, even though Blue Cross Blue Shield holds the responsibility for making sure this plan is filed and is correct for mental health parity, the law is written so that the plan sponsor is ultimately who is responsible in the eyes of the Department of Labor.
Yeah. So if it gets down to it, we probably have to have more detail to this, but if we were notified late, which we were, then, we'd probably seek some guidance from outside counsel just to verify what we should do to make sure we have all safeguards in place.
Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, are they getting fined for this? I mean, what's the rationale? Because I'm looking at, I would assume, and maybe I'm looking at this comparison wrong. So we go from the Blue Choice OOA to the comp choice.
Yeah, that was their original kind of plan design, but what we concluded is they just basically took an off the shelf program that they had filed with the Department of Insurance and said, okay, here's our alternative to you. And I said, no, we're self-funded. We should build a plan that is closely aligned, but yet compliant to the parity law. So we're, that means if we still have, you have to design a plan that's 100%, then design a plan 100%.
Yeah.
Is there gonna, go ahead, Mike.
Just looking at it's close, but there's a lot of 90% compared to 100%.
So and that was John, what he referred to, because we did the analysis. It's a 4% spread basically it's a 4% cost spread that goes back to the member. Now the premium goes down, on the funding side, but people that get hurt on the benefit, they don't care. They care most of all about how it's going to affect them when they start, going through for claims.
And that was the original plan, Randy. You're really trying to hone in not only on the benefit side of it, but also the cost to the employee and employer.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So when it's all said and done, there's really a couple things: get the plan aligned correctly, the cost structure, and get the liability signed off on.
My last thing with it is, we had a lot of preventable. What's the word I'm looking for? Preventable.
Yeah, that won't be affected.
That doesn't.
It's really, so those are all still covered 100%. Okay. That part's to the positive side. Yeah, that doesn't get affected at all.
One concern I have as we're talking about this is I understand that, okay, we're a trust. And as Stephanie stated, that even though it is the responsibility of Blue Cross Blue Shield to file these plans and making sure that we're compliant, we as the trust still have the liability if something's wrong. But how do we as a trust know that our plans are not compliant? I mean, who would need to be reviewing those then if it's not Blue Cross?
It is Blue Cross, and that's because they are the filer and the creator of the document that was offered as the coverage program, and then as planned. So by state and federal laws, it's their responsibility to be the updater to those documents.
And yet we still hold the liability, although we have no. Oh, okay.
Well, so here's the reason we want to sign off, and that is we have a document in place that if we, to Stephanie's point, the Department of Labor ever, comes looking, first of all, what is your process to remedy it? Number one. And number two, having a letter on file that said they took responsibility for the fact they didn't notify us in a timely manner that they weren't compliant.
And they're not being cooperative in providing that written documentation at this point?
Well, they haven't done that yet, but that's what we've asked for.
Okay. Board members, any other questions in regards to this area?
This is probably a dumb question, but I mean, it always seems like we're trying to negotiate with Blue Cross and we're not getting anywhere. I mean, are there other options that it's what, we're tired of working with you? I know Blue Cross is massive. I don't know the insurance world. There's probably I'm just wondering, is that a consideration?
Well, yeah. So I think our contract with Blue Cross is up for renewal next year. And we should go out to bid. I'll just say that right now. As a matter of due diligence, it's a massive project to do it, but it's the right thing to do because it creates tremendous leverage. We've discovered that with every group that we've done. Angie's here, can attest to what happened this last year. We did it, and it's things that we never anticipated were completely to the benefit of the group. And that's part of our discussion that we've had with Blue Cross, that it is, I've said before, and I had our meeting yesterday, and I'll point out these 4 items later on in this discussion that are part of this negotiation that we're under right now. But no matter what, we should have a bid. And the purpose of it is literally just, it ultimately is a function of bringing to light some of the things of the disparity in the processes that we see in the marketplace.
You bring up a good point, Mike, and I'm not trying to defend Blue Cross by any means, but obviously they're having to go through the process of working with their legal team to determine, what is the correct way to communicate this back to Brown & Brown, to NDPHIT, because they're obviously concerned about how they could be held liable in this situation. So that's why it's taking a little bit longer than we would generally like to see. But they've demonstrated again that they're working through the process and just want to have a clear understanding of the effects.
Well, considering NDPHIT went over to Sanford and looking at the number of lives that NDPHIT is insuring and continues to insure with new political subs being added to our trust, I can't imagine that. I mean, we have to be a fairly large group that they're insuring. And is that correct?
It is. Yeah, we have
Okay.
over 8,000 members now.
Yeah. So I think, being able to sit down to dinner with them, I think we do have some leverage from that standpoint.
And believe me, they do know it. They've acknowledged it now a couple of times pretty strongly. And that these items I'll bring up in a few minutes are some of the things they've demonstrated, and a couple of them are pretty significant. That's to the benefit of the trust.
Well, I think that's a great segue of heading into our operational budget. So Brenna, I don't know if you want to kick that off to do the review.
Well, I've got a couple more questions.
Go ahead,
on
Brennan.
this, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So what's the reasoning for segregating the groups with October and January? Why wouldn't we just notify the October groups as well in the same manner that we're notifying the January groups, and then give them that same time period? And that would help alleviate the liability piece of it, I think, wouldn't it?
Well, we actually went down that road.
Okay.
And to Brenna's point, as we talked about this, she said, look, if we I don't want to paraphrase what you said, but I think you just brought up the point. Look, if we have a liability, let's fix it. Because they're not allowing that same latitude for January. And so the timing of it in the event of, again, a mental parity individual having affected by it, we just thought it would be best and judicious to remedy it as quickly as we can instead of waiting until the next renewal. And you're only talking, I think there's 3 groups, is that right?
January.
Yeah, 3 January groups. And then of course, all the October ones will happen with that as well.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, why don't we notify the October groups in February the same way that we're notifying the January groups,
You're saying,
and make that change early?
well, yeah, and okay, I see what you're saying. Well,
Because what I just don't want to knowingly expose ourselves. Those federal, if you get into the federal fine stuff, that can get costly quick. And just a quick Google search looking at that, it was $100 a day per employee if you're caught violating this, which is whether or not that's the actual number. That was just a quick Google search, but that doesn't sound out of line for a federal fine like that.
That is our intent, is to remedy this for the groups that renew in October.
yeah, those will all get fixed.
Right.
But he's saying
You
right
wanna
now
do it
they
right
are,
now.
they are out of compliance
Yeah,
even
well,
October.
so we'd have to look at, we can certainly look at it.
I
don't
think it's
know.
just the volume of
It's the
enrollment.
volume of all the groups that we'd have to do, but it's balanced with the risk too. So you're right. Now, the one thing that they said that, and Stephanie, correct me, but I from the last call we had, they said that they were, going to take the liability for the October groups, but they haven't put that in writing yet either. And so that's the problem that we're really faced with.
Yeah, we asked them to have their attorneys formalize what they told us in our conference calls. And their response was an email response from the account manager that gave us nothing. And I'm under the impression that their attorneys are not willing to put anything in writing that would hold Blue Cross Blue Shield liable in any way, is my impression. And again, under the law would not hold Blue Cross Blue Shield liable. The law would hold NDPHIT liable. That's just the way the law is written. And then whatever recourse NDPHIT would have is whatever recourse NDPHIT would have. One thing that we are waiting on from Blue Cross Blue Shield is that plan mapping. And we have put a rush on the 3 groups so that we can get them enrolled by April. The concern that we have is that the other 13 groups, we're relying on Blue Cross Blue Shield to get us the information timely. So if we were to move forward with moving them before their renewal, that is absolutely doable. The concern is that we've got to get Blue Cross on board to get us those updated mapped plans for those 13 groups. So while we might be able to do the January groups in April, assuming we get the plans quickly and can notify the groups quickly, and they can notify their employees to give them that 60-day window, the other 13 may not go in April. They might actually get pushed out to May or June. And so at that point, they're already starting to do the planning for their other open enrollment. So again, it is NDPHIT's decision, but the timing of getting the information from Blue Cross and then that 60-day window for notification is why we were saying, well, maybe the October open enrollment window is more realistic for those 13 groups. But again, it all comes back to Blue Cross getting us the mapping, and then we can move from there with the requirements that we have for notification.
I wonder if Blue Cross Blue Shield would hold the liability in their hands if the mapping plans would be done sooner. Sorry, rhetorical question.
Yeah. Well, I agree with Stephanie. If you want us to go and pursue the getting them all corrected in a much more timely fashion, then we'll take that action and work on that basis. So that because we have to map them anyway, we no matter what, those groups have to be corrected in a plan design, and that's kind of an iteration process. So it would be important, even if we started it now, we'll have a better understanding of the time frame to get it actually done and corrected, so that it meets the criteria we're looking for, and then we can set forth the time frame to actually make those changes and implement.
And just so you're aware, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Stephanie.
We did have a conference call on Tuesday with Blue Cross, and I did tell them they need to start mapping the October groups now. Okay. So they do have that on their list. It's just the first 3 from January are the priority.
I guess if there's and I'd like to hear feedback from board members, but if we're able to reduce our liability and move these schools onto a compliant plan, that seems to make sense. But I'd like to hear from the other board members. What are your thoughts?
I would agree with that. And I like the idea of trying to move it forward faster, or if we can get that October group in there too, I think we should try to get there too.
So would you like a formal motion to be able to have Brown and Seek move ahead in getting the October plans compliant sooner than the renewal date for them? I think it would be good to have a motion so we have an official.
Logistically, Randy, how would that work then? So you guys notify the groups and say, hey, we've got an issue, we got to transition you to a new plan, but the terms of the plan are going to be identical outside of increasing the mental health component. Is that kind of what your thought is on that? Well,
that's where we're waiting to see what they're going to come back with. We don't. That's an unknown piece at this point, Brendan. We've asked for that, but until once they give us that plan, then we model it against the existing plan So we know we can communicate to the group if there's any differences at all. Because like I said, we just want to make sure that everybody has the right expectation of what that plan is going to look like.
So with the schools, Randy, are there 13 different plans, or are they the same plan?
Stephanie, you know that better than I do, on the comparison for the October groups.
I apologize. They're installing windows and doors, and I had some background noise. Could you repeat that question, please?
Just asking, with the renewals that are in October with the schools, do they have similar plans? Is Blue Cross Blue Shield going to have to map 13 separate plans, or are there groups? Is it maybe there's 3 plans for the 13 schools? Is there any similarities to them, or are they?
There is similarity to the plans. So they're all in an out of area plan design. So it's a very similar plan design, but each group might have unique items within the plan. So we want them to look at each individual group. They can't just lump them all into one. We do want them to take the time to look at them individually.
Sure. Okay.
So Brown and Brown, you guys are suggesting that it wouldn't be feasible to make this happen before October. That's where you guys are at.
Yeah. If that's what you want us to do, that's where we'll go for.
But it is or isn't? I guess that was my question. Is it feasible from your guys' perspective to do it before October? Like, is it?
Yeah, it is feasible. It just means that it's all contingent on the timing that we get things finalized with Blue Cross on those plan designs. From our side, that's the contingency. It's just.
And what would your recommendation be, Randy?
Well, I'm in agreement with Jenny and well, I think the consensus too, and that is, hey, we want to mitigate any liability. Let's put forward. We got to fix it anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's put forward and get it done.
Is it really a motion, or is it more, can we do it on consensus?
Consensus.
We move forward, because there's so many moving parts, it sounds like, with that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll just go with consensus. I think with the board saying move forward with trying to get the October plans compliant before that renewal date.
As soon as possible.
Yeah, as soon as possible.
Okay. And then we'll give a communication update as soon as we get information that we can push over to Seek and as well as you, Jenny, and you can just distribute it to the board at large.
Okay. That would be great.
I apologize. I have a really quick question. I should have asked earlier. So if we do move these plans to be compliant prior to their October renewal, it's not going to change like the premiums or anything prior to their October renewal, would it?
Well, that's the part we have to calculate, because what the first iteration they gave doesn't work. It was a reduction of premium for those member groups, but it was also an additional risk exposure to the member.
Okay. I just, from a school standpoint, like for budget purposes and negotiations, a lot of schools are coming up and stuff. So there's the pros and cons of doing it prior to the October
that's a good point.
date. But, okay. Thank you.
In my estimate, and well, I shouldn't say this because I was thinking at least those initial groups, it was a reduction of the benefit, but these other groups, it may be, we just have to wait till we see what those final plan designs look like.
Okay, thank you.
And Randy, just to clarify, and I think it was in the memo, but just to make sure, when you're looking at out-of-pocket deductibles, those types of things, those would transfer. If they're transitioning with new plans, they're not having to start over again. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, so I would say consensus is move forward, work with Blue Cross Blue Shield to see if they can get the plan designs done sooner than later to be able to move forward with that. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments in regards to the mental health parity? Okay, operations budget. Brenna, I'll let you kick that off.
All right, for the sake of time, I will be very quick here. The top of this document just shows the different payments that the trust makes for the PEPM. for all our contracts. Those are all already approved. They're just for your information. And then the green part, or the bottom part, if it's not in color, is the operation draft budget that basically is just based on historical expenses of this past year. The legal, we have several different legal pieces that go out. The actuary, the marketing for events and other things to get our name out there. Our insurance coverage is just the governing board liability, and then there's a bond as well for a traveler's bond. That's about $2,000 a year. We have money budgeted for you guys to go to training, for board training, as well as the auditing and tax filing and travel for our meetings. Anybody have questions on the details?
I don't necessarily have a question. I just have a quick comment. And this is from an NDIRF perspective. So line 16, it's the SEEK NDIRF member education, and it's $87,000. I can assure you that we're not providing $87,000 of value to NDPHIT from NDIRF's perspective right now on the marketing side. Certainly on the audit oversight side, we are. So maybe that's an area where we can discuss, Brenna, down the road. Is there a better use of those dollars from NDPHIT's perspective than to pay them to NDIRF for marketing? We're kind of past that tipping point now where we don't need to leverage NDIRF's marketing anymore. We could likely utilize that in different ways. So nothing that we need to decide right this second, but I just wanted to throw that out there. It kind of caught my eye when I was looking at it, saying, well, there's got to be a better way we can use those dollars. So.
And that 87 is between the two of us. You guys are get the per head for the subdivisions, and we get the schools. We are using ours in more than just marketing. We hired Angie and right. That. But yeah.
Maybe, and that's an area where I think if there are improvements SEEK can make to better assist NDPHIT with those dollars, those are better used that way from NDPHIT's perspective than they are paying to the reserve fund. Because like I said, we're kind of past that point now of leveraging NDRF's marketing reach for NDPHIT. So I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration down the road here.
Okay, we do appreciate you putting us in your newsletters though. But yeah, any other thoughts on that? Do we need a motion to approve the budget, Jenny?
Yeah, I would like to do that. At first, is there any other questions or comments in regards to the budget? And just in case you don't know, PEPM is per employee per month. FYI, I didn't know that right away either. So if there's anybody else who didn't, that's what that means. So any other questions or comments in regards to the budget? If so, I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second for Mike.
Thanks, Mike. So we have a motion and a second. Any members of the budget or any members that are opposed to the proposed budget, say aye. Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Brenna, for putting that together. I know budgeting is not always fun, so I appreciate you putting those numbers together. Next up is our EAP compliance. It was memo 2 in your attachments. So as you all know, we just launched our new EAP program, obviously in October. The schools started that, and then we, political subs, started that most recently in January. We were informed that we don't meet one of the standards of the plan, which is offering an EAP benefit to all eligible employees. Currently, we were offering it to the NDPHIT employees, obviously those that were signed up. So if you have a full-time employee in your office that's eligible to be under the NDPHIT health insurance and they waive that coverage, we're currently, the EAP was not being offered to them. And so that is a standard that we now need to be compliant with and offer the EAP plan to all eligible employees, whether they're on the NDPHIT plan or not. So like in our office, if you have, like we have half-time employees who aren't on our health insurance plan, but they don't qualify to be on the health insurance plan. Those are defined as non-eligible. And so those wouldn't be included in this program or in this benefit. So Randy, do you have any other comments in regards to, I know you had to renegotiate some rates because obviously there's more people that are now covered in the plan as well.
Yeah, so we went through the entire, again, compliance audit process just to make sure everything was aligned. That's, they came back and said, our compliance attorney said it needs to be available to all members if it's integral to the health plan. Whatever eligible employees are, they're entitled to the benefit as well. So we went back to E&I and we said, okay, here's what we need to do. They tried to give us some ideas to, navigate the structure. We just said, no, it's got to be this way. So we challenged them to go back and come up with a budget that would be most aligned to what we already had budgeted. So they came back at a flat $70,000 a year. And if you were to take our membership, which is 35 employees times $1.52, it's within 6 cents per employee per month in the budget, is what it comes out to be. So they actually work really hard to make sure that it can work based on the fact that now it's available to everybody. So that was a concession on their part, really, to work with us to ensure that it wasn't onerous on a budgeting basis, and that allowed the compliance component to take place. So that's
Randy, do you foresee E&I, because I know they did work with us to try to come up with a reasonable fee that wasn't going to break our budget, because it was obviously something we weren't anticipating. Do you see them working with us having a similar rate, or was this kind of a, we're going to help you out until your next budget cycle?
They agreed that it's the go forward, similar situation as we grow. It's basically going to be proportional to that, to their 70,000. So if we bring on 400 more employees, whatever that proportional is, that's what it will be adjusted in 24.
Okay.
Yeah, I specifically asked for that. I said, don't give us this nice thing, and then all of a sudden,
right.
So,
board members, do you have any questions in regards to the EAP compliance? All right. So moving forward with our COBRA administrator. So we use WEX. I can just speak from a boots on the ground person administrator. It's been a bit of a struggle using WEX throughout, utilizing COBRA benefits. I think it's really mainly due to the fact that they're not really equipped in how our trust is set up, with the trust being kind of the parent, and then all of the political subs being like an offset of that, or a subgroup of that. So I know that SEEK has been working with Brown & Brown to explore some other COBRA administrators that have more experience in the trust area, and also in that structure that we have set up with, I think they said parent-child in the memo. I thought that was a great analogy from that standpoint. We don't have a contract with WEX, so it's not like we're contracted to be with them through the end of the year or whatever the case may be. So I think it is great that we're looking to explore some other administrators for COBRA, and then knowing that we don't have a contract, having some flexibility to go forward, perhaps with a different provider. Any updates from that standpoint on WEX or our COBRA administrators, and being able to look at some options there? That's our Brandy or Brenna discussion.
No.
But
I think this was just kind of informational and wanting to get board consensus and approval to move forward and bring some vendors for the board to look at. Is that?
Yeah, how is I'm not sure if anybody else has had experiences dealing directly with WEX, but do you have any feedback, board members, in regards to that? Or what are your feelings about looking at maybe some different administrators for this?
I will do some input with WEX. They haven't always been the easiest to work with. I know we have like our HSAs and FSAs with them as well. I personally chose to just administrate my COBRA plans just for the pure fact that I felt like it wouldn't be an easy ride going with them. So I wouldn't be opposed to looking at a different vendor for that.
Yeah. Anyone else? I would concur with you, Sonia, in that regard. We have a few people that have been on COBRA, and it has been a little bit of a struggle to get things in order. So board, are we okay with having SEEK move forward and working with Brown and Brown to bring some suggestions forward on looking at some new administrators for COBRA for the board to look at maybe at our next meeting? Maybe not. Would March be appropriate, Brenna, or would you guys want some more time to do some?
Stephanie's already been looking, just because the specific parent-child setup is what would work best. So Stephanie, do you think March will be appropriate?
We already have 3 vendors that we've vetted out of all those that we went to RFP for. We're ready to present them as options for the board to consider anytime the board is ready. We would want to make sure that we gave enough time to whatever vendor is selected, if a new vendor is selected, to move all of these groups, because there are now 112 groups potential and more coming on, because the smaller groups that are under 20 now have to administer COBRA as well. So we would want to make sure that we moved forward expeditiously if possible, in order to give the vendor that is selected enough time to properly onboard 112 groups.
And Stephanie, maybe that is a request that you could make to the organizations that you've been working with to find out what their timeline would be, to be able to vet everyone out and to transition them over to their program. Obviously, this isn't something that can be done in a month. I think we all understand that, but it would be nice to know what their timelines would be in that regard.
Yes, absolutely. And we would want to know from a perspective of the board, would you want to move the 10-1 groups this year, or would you want to wait and move them next year? Because we would move each group with their renewal cycle to be consistent with how it's currently being administered.
Board members, do you have any feedback on whether we'd want to wait to do the transition at renewals? Or do we want to do something mid-year?
My recommendation is that you do them at the renewals, but my question is more, do you want to move forward with 10-1-2023 or 1-1-2024 and then do the 10-1-2024 groups?
We could do a 10-1-2023 and then a 1-1-2024, I would assume.
I would prefer to hear from people that work in this. I couldn't tell yet, whatever with Sonia, it seems like she has some, inside info on how this works. I don't, whatever would be best. I don't have any input.
I definitely agree with implementing, on an October renewal date, 100%, because that is kind of the time that most administrators or business managers, plan time in their schedule to work with those types of things. I guess I would agree that if you had, what would the change take? What would it be in October of 20? I think we would be ready for 2023, but if it's a lengthy process, I wouldn't be opposed to, seeing what they could propose to us by January and then implement it in October of 2024. Things don't happen quickly, I've learned, so. I could see that be more realistic, I guess.
Okay. Do you think it would be unrealistic, Stephanie? I guess another question is, do you feel that it would be a bit of a, it would be difficult if we would bring the schools on at the October 2023 renewal? I know that they're obviously the larger of our group in the trust.
As long as a decision is made quickly by the board for a vendor, let's say we presented in March, these vendors, and you vetted them, you know, within 30 days, and a decision was made within 30 days from viewing the 3 vendors, so that we had a decision by the end of April. I believe that would give us enough time to be able to move forward with transitioning the October groups.
In
But does that give the
2023?
Yes, in 2023, but does 30 days give the board enough time to consider what they need to consider
Right.
from the March presentation? And then, of course, we would do what we did with the EAP, where we would have a committee view the 3 vendors that we're presenting, make your recommendation or selection from those 3 vendors, and then move forward with that vendor selection.
Well, maybe we can take this in steps. So if we could have the presentation at our March meeting, and then have some time to look through that. And if the board feels that 30 days isn't enough, we can always look at then doing a January 1 date and then an October 1 of 2024 if we don't feel that, if we need more time to make a decision. So maybe we can just look at this in steps. So if we could bring the administrators that you are looking at for us to review, and then we can determine how long of a review period we need to be able to make a decision. Does that sound okay with everyone? Okay. So Stephanie, if you can get in touch with those companies to be able to put something together for our March meeting, that would be appreciated.
How much time would you like to give each of those vendors, or would you like me to present all 3 vendors and then do individual presentations with the vendors after March? Would you
Board
like to
members?
see the 3
Yeah.
members first, decide if you want to go forward with all 3, or maybe whittle it down to 2, and then proceed with individual meetings from there?
Board members, what is your preference?
Just simplicity for me. I'm just thinking about the comparison, going back to what was provided. Like, it'd be nice just to have a 3 side-by-side thing that I could just quickly go, okay. And then for somebody that doesn't work in this world, it would be easier for me to see something like that. And then maybe a summary by Stephanie, unless we want to dig in the weeds on each of these 3 things.
I don't think it's gonna have as much detail of differences, like when we were doing the EAP, those were things that they gave different benefits. This is Cobra administration. So basically it's gonna come back down to who can organize us, what we want to be like, and how can the business managers work with them. So I think if Stephanie gives us a summary of the 3, we'll probably be able to choose
Okay.
from there. That's my opinion.
Far less complicated.
It's far less complicated than the EAP.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So Stephanie, if you can do a summary of the 3 to be able to present to the board of directors, and then at that time, we can determine if we want to hear from all 3 of them, if there's 2, or if there's one that just really stands out that we feel would be the one that we're going to select, we can go from there. So are you comfortable with that?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, next item on the agenda is task force update. Just to let the board know, as we continue to kind of walk through things, we had great meetings with SEEK on the operational standpoint of things, and I think things are moving forward well there. Our next task is going to be concentrating on reviewing our current provider contracts and getting a better handle on what services each of them provides, and then determining how good of a fit it is for the trust, And then we'd be able, as a task force, to be able to come back and present those findings to the board, maybe at our summer or our fall board meeting. So just a quick update on that. Brennan, did you have anything to add, being a fellow task force member?
I do not know.
Okay. So under our next one is our exiting trust discussion. This is kind of fun. So we had an entity, yeah, this discussion was kind of lively. So we have an entity who wants to give their 1-year notice to get out of the plan. That's our requirement from the trust. If you no longer want to be in the trust, you give a 12-month notice. But they asked if there could be a caveat that they have the option to wait and see what their premiums will be like for the upcoming year to determine if they really want to stay or go. So personally, I kind of feel that defeats the purpose of giving a notice. But in this discussion, we really don't have guidelines in place. When we have someone, we say that, yep, you have a 12-month notice to be out of the plan, but that's really all we have. So what are your thoughts on, first of all, allowing this entity to give a 12-month notice with the caveat of allowing them to do a wait and see?
Randy, are there any operational issues by allowing the wait and see? I mean, are we putting ourselves at risk of having an issue, say, with our reinsurance or with our administrative contract or anything like that by saying, yeah, we might have this group or we might not?
Well, it's there's nothing on that side. It's more of the risk to the trust. So there's really two sides to it. In this case, if this is a high loss ratio group, so if they left, it actually benefits the trust. The word, it would be bad if we don't have a policy. If you get a bunch of healthy groups looking at it, say, hey, we'll risk you because we'll based on the renewal you give to us, because we know we're a good loss ratio. And depending where you come in, we think we can get coverage at a lower rate because we have good loss ratio. That's the risk. That's why you give the 1-year notice, because first of all, it's ample time, and then the provisions of the run out claims are all specified in their participation agreement. So relative to their deposit, but so all those terms are laid out, but there's no risk in terms of the contractual components as much as there is to the risk to the trust, especially if it's a healthy group.
When I first
what we're
read
doing
this,
with the notice requirement is preventing the competitive component. Once a group is in, if you want to leave, you can leave, but we're not going to get into a bidding war.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
yeah, and when I first read this, it went in my thought process was there a year from now, because how would you know in 1 month or 12-month notice what your rates are going to be? And we can't wait that year. It's actually a year from that notice, wouldn't it be?
Yes, and that's another important piece, Steve, because we have to underwrite based on the known risk. So we, even going into, for our underwriting purposes, in this case, like them giving notice will actually be a windfall to our underwriting, but we can't actually put that in the underwriting. But if it was the flip side, then we could be understating what our adjustment needs to be if they were a good risk. So maybe I didn't answer your question.
Yeah,
because
so Stetson is and I'm not sure if we need to approve the letter that they write as a board.
well, the letter was just notice, which was the
Okay.
requirement, but what we do need is a policy on this subject, because if it gets to one, everybody's gonna know about it.
So everyone could put in a 12-month notice.
Yeah, and say,
In case they wanted to leave, they didn't like the
that
rates.
idea of that provision, that really doesn't, that's kind of fluffy, but
Yeah.
well, no, it's gotta have some rigid component to it.
So really the question therein lies is, if there's an entity within the trust that's giving their 12-month notice, that's their 12 months to say that they are going to be removed from the plan, if you will, at the end of that plan year. What they're asking is if they can have the caveat of, even though we're giving our notice, we still want to be able to play the field, if you will, to determine if it is in our best interest to stay in the plan, which I think kind of nullifies the whole 1 year notice, in my opinion, but be interested to hear what other board members think about that.
This is Mike. I think it's a bad idea. They defeats the purpose of everything, like everybody's been saying.
I agree. I don't think we put any loopholes in there.
Mhm.
And so if there's consensus, I can draft a document and also put language in the participation agreement that specifies that, or an update to the participation agreement.
And then when you talk about the deposit piece, in the memo, it's showing in the agreement that it defines member deposits, considerations for the trust, and those are all listed in the trust currently. I mean, I do feel that if, D, which is highlighted, the allocated to offset terminal liability claims for members that give their required 1 year notice and leave the health insurance trust pool. Once they're out of the plan, how long is there I'm not sure from the insurance side of things. So when you have claims, run out claims after they're no longer on the plan, is there a cutoff period? Is it 90 days or 120 days that they can have a claim runoff, or is it indefinitely until they're done with that medical issue?
That's a really good question. So from an underwriting basis, when you have what we call an incurred but not paid IBNR,
Right.
what you're trying to do is predict that runout. And the conservative basis at minimum is 180 days. And if you really want to be the ultimate conservative, you're going to give an entire 1 year runout. That ensures that it's ample time, because and I think North Dakota is similar, they have a timely filing requirement for the provider, but I think they give up to 1 year. So let's say a provider just said, hey, I saw this service, but for whatever reason, whether their billing company or they did not get the billing done correctly or timely, ultimately, if under the timely filing requirement, they could extend it for up until that law provision. And Blue Cross would pay the claim, and then you come back to the trust. So I would suggest that you give at least a 1 year to be conservative as the timely filing requirement. If they have any money left in the reserve after all the claims paid, if you want to have the provision, then they would get their portion of the deposit back. But that would be the conservative approach.
Well, and that was going to be my question, because some of these deposits for these entities are substantial. And so let's say this entity has a, I don't know, let's just say a $50,000 deposit. And after their claims run out, there's still a balance of $15,000. Is it appropriate for us to keep that money as the deposit, or should we be returning that back to the entity? I'd be curious to hear what other board members think about that. Not everyone at once again.
I'll chime in. I'll take a crack. I think, I don't know, for us, we knew what we were getting into. We were committed to this, and it's kind of like, if I leave, I'm not expecting to get the deposit back. I'm leaving for some kind of reason, or I'm unhappy, or maybe there's, the grass is greener. I don't know what the thing would be, but and I also don't think people are going to be just like shopping around. Like, this seems, I don't know if this is a county or whatever this group is. I mean, I don't know, like, it took an act of God for us to move from where we were to like, for my teachers union. I mean, we've had some other things, so I don't, unless you guys start just cranking up things, I mean, we're I guess I'm responsible for that too when I say you guys, but I just don't see people like shopping around and moving. I think these are probably where I do maybe see some of that, are those really small groups that are kind of like, maneuverable, whereas larger organizations aren't going to be moving around.
So as a board, how do we feel about, yeah, like you said, Mike, the deposit, that's just kind of being in the group. Do we have an obligation that if their claims run out and there's still a balance to their deposit, that we refund that? Or is that just a reserve that continues to be in the trust as part of our plan moving forward?
Well, under the
Okay.
under the trust agreement, there is no obligation that we return that. I think
No,
when we look at it from our perspective, we got to look out for NDPHIT and not, and as Mike described, I mean, when you join and our group did too at the reserve fund. I mean, same thing. When we joined NDPHIT, and we recognized we've got to make a deposit to ensure that the health of NDPHIT and we're able to pay claims and all that kind of stuff. And so I think from a board perspective, when looking at the health of NDPHIT, I think it's prudent for us to maintain those dollars in the trust and not start kicking out refunds. I mean, at some point, if we, end up in a position where, and that was kind of the idea from my understanding from the get-go is, okay, once we get healthy enough as a trust where we feel confident on our surplus and not needing those deposits, maybe we can look at returning a portion of those through a program similar to the conferment of benefit program at the reserve fund. But that took 10 years for the reserve fund to get to the point where they could offer a conferment of benefits. And that was through the benefit of having investment income and those kinds of things. And so I think, that's just a discussion we've got to have down the road and not, 2 years into the program about returning the deposits.
right, or being able to use those reserves or that excess to buy down premiums. So everybody gets a 2% discount for the year or something like that. But you're right, this isn't something that we can do in the next 6 months. It might take another 7 to 10 years before we're in that position. I just wanted to get a feel from the board if we're okay with saying, okay, if you're out and you're giving your notice, first of all, that's your notice. There isn't any caveats to wait and see. I think that we need to have some teeth in that notice, and if you're giving your notice, that's it. You're telling us you're going to be done in 12 months. And then with that deposit that we're comfortable in stating that was your buy-in, if you will, to be part of the NDPHIT program, and that's not something that's refundable at the end of you leaving the plan. I would agree with you too, Mike. I don't see this being let's try this for a year and then we're going to shop and go there and then we want to come back. I mean, this is a big decision for any employer when you're moving benefits, you're moving employees' cheese, if you will. And it's something that's a pretty big decision for any entity that's doing that. So I hopefully don't see this coming up often. But I do know that the entity that is leaving was one that received one of the highest adjustments because their claim loss history was very high. And so from that standpoint, I mean, I can understand if they want to shop around, but I think about too, with their claim loss history, they might be disappointed in what they find out there for rates. So, okay, so we as a board, we're comfortable with that. Their notice is their notice. There is no caveat. And on a wait and see type basis. So Brenna, if you're comfortable with informing them that if they've provided their official notice, then they will be done at the end of their plan year. Did they ask about their deposit?
They did. Yeah, we said the provisions are all laid out in the participation agreement.
Okay.
And it could be one of those four, which is pretty much discretionary by the board.
Mm-hmm.
We probably need to adopt this as a go forward policy. because
Yeah,
that's-
we can write it.
Yeah, we're going to write an official. Yeah, we'll work on it.
But I'm saying Stutzman was delivered the messaging that they would be allowed to stay.
That's what I'm saying. We just have to tell them this is the board decision. Let's deal with it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, what I would state for Stutzman is if because they didn't know, I don't know, I guess this is a board question. I shouldn't just say as chair, this is how it's going to go, but if Stutzman was giving their notice thinking they had the option of wanting to stay in or having that option to stay in, maybe to just reiterate to them that you understand by providing this official notice is stating that you will be out of the plan at the end of your plan term.
Okay, so that's what we need to
That's
do
what
then,
we
is
need.
we need to give them the option to rescind their notice. Because they were the first group to go through the process.
There was, yeah, the
So,
policy wasn't there.
There was no policy in place. They gave the notice with the assumption that they would be allowed to stay if they didn't find a more favorable rate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that that's the right way to move forward. That would be, up to the trustees, of course, but that would be our suggestion, I think, would be to allow them at least the option to rescind the notice.
Because as
Are they on a calendar year, Brenna? Are they a January
yes.
to December?
Yeah.
So this is something that's fairly recent then. It's not
Yeah.
like this has been 5 months in and now we're trying to determine whether they can do a renewal.
December,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, it's
29th.
December 29th. Yep.
Okay, so maybe from that standpoint, informing them that once you give an official notice, that is your notice to be out of the plan, and confirm with them that that is still their intent.
That's fair,
Okay.
which we'll do.
All right, any other discussion or questions on that? All right, NDPHIT Wellness. So I know that Seek and Brown have been having discussions with Thriver about doing on-site wellness screenings. Randy, I'm not going to steal your thunder on maybe qualifying for a grant through Blue Cross Blue Shield. I know you've been talking about that.
Yep.
One of the things that I'd like to consider when you think about on-site wellness, this is quite a beast. We have 112 plans or entities in our plan, and that's a lot of people to see on site. And so maybe looking at it from a pilot project or pilot program to test the process, to see how it goes, be able to evaluate that process, and then maybe pick another entity to be able to try this through, and throughout the year or over the next couple of years, look at maybe doing some on-site wellness. But Randy, I know you have a lot of detail in this area, so I'm going to turn it over to you to share what you have for us today.
Yeah, so and I'll try to go through this as quick as I can because we were short on time. But in effect, it's the idea that it's really the approach is the organizational health structure, and it's meeting with each organization as to helping. Part of our challenge is getting engagement to the member groups, to the members themselves. That is all indicative to a large in part to the organization and leadership. So that's one of the things that we're trying to work. And the idea of just one or two groups to start with literally is the idea, because understanding the nuances and the scalability is critical. So I'll kind of skip over this, except that I'll send out a copy of this to everybody that you can read it at your own basis. But it's really starting, for example, with Mandan Public Schools. Where it came from is the superintendent and the business managers like, this is something that's really important to us. We need to do it. And they are all in many components to making this work. On-site screenings are also on their venue. So in this, again, are things that Jared talks about in population health, about value on investment versus return on investment. It's about the retention, the employee benefit, building a culture, the presenteeism, the productivity, all those are elements. And it's about messaging, getting the right messaging to each group as to why it's important that they should consider doing an engagement mechanism, but not just wellness, but it's really in well-being and wellness and population health combined. And then there are pretty legitimate statistics about looking at populations that are driving cost, and I actually have your data, I'll show you in a minute, that's relative to this. And then looking at, everybody's always saying, what's the ROI? Well, there are components and there are studies that validate return on investment as well as the value that comes from doing this. The next thing is your data. So I pulled essentially what's the preventative care really is the driver. And the reason that on-site screening is so important is because the preventative care is the piece that people are not engaging to even do an assessment of their health. So preventative, the gaps in care, essentially what they call non-compliant individuals in NDPHIT, it's a big number. In fact, it's huge. I think Jared brought up and Kelly in the last meeting is that, in terms of the number of cases relative to hypertension and metabolic disease in the population is just, it's one of the largest percentages that they've seen. And I know that we see consistently compared to other places in the country. The other one is chronic conditions gaps in care. And what this is so important is that these are people that have already been identified as in risk, like the hypertension, diabetes, mental health that you see on the scale on the picture there below, and the savings opportunity in each one of those, and the number of non-compliant. That means they should be, first of all, engaged in preventative care, but they're not compliant to even a regimen of care. And what this does is it escalates not just the risk to the group, but more importantly, it's to the individual. And so that's why looking at all this very detail is really important to create the strategy or the structure as to why you want to consider doing the on-site screenings. So I segmented this information from our Plan IT report. And so your chronic conditions, let's see if I can minimize this on my screen because I can't see my own information here. There you go. So this just tells you in the top 6 conditions within NDPHIT, what's really important that's on this data is essentially chronic disease members represent 20 or 69%, 69.5% of the services rendered, and almost 42% of the membership. That is like almost 10% higher than what we normally see of an aggregated population. Those that are being treated for depression, high blood pressure, asthmatics, diabetes, obesity, and coronary heart disease. What is also most important, where I highlighted where it says Milliman risk score. So what we do is we take the data, we ingest it into our model and say, okay, the CRI number that you see there under Milliman is the entire population. You're at 0.92 on a value of 1 in terms of your risk. But what's projected in the next 12 months is to 0.98. That is huge. In other words, it's not just the chronic disease individuals, but it's actually some of the healthy people that are going to be predicted to be in a health condition. And then, of course, you can see your chronic disease are at 1.40 and 1.44 on a predictive basis. So when you look at also the cost between a chronic disease individual at $12,000, this is per member, not employee, but per member, $12,000 per member versus non-chronic at $3,616. Well, it gives you a reason to say, you're spending almost 4 times as much money for a chronic disease individual versus non-chronic, and it's a high prevalence in the population of these conditions. So you've seen that picture from Jared before, but the whole idea of on-site screenings is you can keep the healthy, have engaged the moderate risk, but also engage the at-risk and the acute care patients, which are costing most of the plan the money. So it's a way to actually go to a site in a very simple way, but provide an incentive for them to show up, and I'll explain to you just 1 second what it looks like. But that's the whole idea of getting the entire population an opportunity to opt in for a screening or a health fair. Here's another piece of information, and I apologize, you can't see it. So if you were to minimize it, you'd be able to see it up here, just so you know. So we looked at the top drugs too. Well, Ozempic is your top drug that has escalated 160. One of the top drugs that's escalated 163% just in the last 12 months. Well, Ozempic, you've seen it all advertised. It's basically semaglutide, which is a peptide that they branded as a manufacturer, and then you have Wegovy, which is the weight loss component to it. But Ozempic is predominantly for diabetic patients. The reason I bring this up is because I've been in this discussion with Blue Cross to say you should cover semaglutide through compounding pharmacies, and here's the reason why. when I showed that, and I talked to them about this yesterday, because right now, the retail price for a 30-day supply of Ozempic is $877. Wegovy, which is also semaglutide, is $1,407, where a compounding pharmacy is $225. It'd be better that even NDPHIT just says, look, you can go through a compounding pharmacy and it's zero versus spending $400,000. Of course, they have the choice. They can choose to do it or not. But it's the idea that if you offer it at no cost as a benefit, it could give an option for decreasing that cost to them, but more importantly, still gives them access to the drug. So that's just a side note based on the data I looked at. So how does this work? What does it look like? What's a 30-minute on-site provider preventative care counseling session? It includes biometrics, blood composition tests. It would be engaged to a telehealth nurse practitioner that would do a preventative care nutritional counseling session that's about 15 minutes. There's basically a series of questions, and they get the information, results from the glucose and lipid panel, as well as the body composition test, and then they ask questions in that interview. I went to Blue Cross yesterday and I said, we would like you to cover the cost for the biometric and the body composition and the nurse practitioner, which is going to be anywhere from $75 to $90 per person. So I'm putting this in a detailed proposal to them. And they were open to the idea that, they want to help. But essentially they wanted me to give them the detail, and also they wanted us to tie an incentive, which we already have in the wellness program. Right now it's $250 a year that the employee gets and the spouse can get. But if they come to a screening event, they would like us to tie some portion of that money for the member to show up, which I talked to Mike about at Thriver, and he said we can do that very easily. In other words, it's some economic value to the member for their participation. It's also including a dietitian, and health coaching is the follow-up. So behavior change reduces risk and increases adherence. So Thriver, which I didn't know until I went through this whole detail with Mike, but he's already, in his model, he covers $2.75 per employee per month of his $4.50 towards coaching and dietitians. That's already part of his model. We've actually met some people that are working with his dietitians. But I just didn't know how he had this whole thing set up in terms of the structure of it. He also provides coverage for the coaching, which is $75 per hour for coaches. And he provides the dietitian coverage at $320. But it's up to that $2.75 basically. So for this event, he said, we'll include all of our dietitians and our health coaches if people want to see them following the health screen. The other component to it is we feel it is strong that we support the local providers. So if there are any conditions that are discovered, then there would be a referral from the nurse practitioner to a local specialist or even their own PCP, their family practitioner, and make sure that there was a good handoff of whatever happened. And they had the ability to hand that patient off to the local provider. This is I showed you this diagram before, but this shows you how the whole process works. They get a link before they come to the event where they've done the assessment questions, or they can show up and just fill it out there. Then someone takes their blood. It's a finger stick. It's not complicated. It's not like you're doing a venipuncture. They get the results within 5 minutes of the blood. And then they do the body scan, which is about 5 minutes. And then that information is tabulated into it with an iPad that the telehealth provider sees the results and the assessment information. And then again, it's the follow-up to either a provider or to the registered dietitian or a coach following that assessment. And I'm going through this very quickly, but I some of this I already covered in the last one. And basically the body composition component. In fact, I got a organization that's willing to make those available at the screening event. So I also asked Blue Cross to give us a grant if we want to set them up at multiple locations at multiple employers throughout the state. So those are follow-up items that I'm doing with them. And this is just, again, what the body composition test does. And it's an app that the data can be shared with a registered dietitian or the health coach. And these are the questions that the provider actually goes through with that individual in that sometimes it takes 30 minutes. But I would say on average, it's 15 to 20 minutes that they're asking these type of questions with the individual based on the results. So if they have elevated glucose or lipid results that come, or if their composition test shows high visceral fat composition, then those are the areas that they speak to them about. And then they're giving them ideas about nutritional counseling as well as exercise. And in most cases, they're trying to get them engaged with the registered dietitian. And this is the registered dietitian group that Mike actually has contracted that's been doing this already. They're out of Minneapolis, and I've had multiple calls with Ashley and Marcy who run the organization. And they have registered dietitians that are all over the country, but basically they coordinate this process through. Because the good thing that came out of COVID is that preventative care, and especially in North Dakota, can all be done via telemedicine for registered dietitian, nutritional counseling, and coaching, and the insurance carriers support it. So this just tells you kind of their process that they go through when they're speaking to these individuals. In the end, though, it's this really the idea that we have the coaching and the registered dietitian and what they're focused on that initial assessment with the provider. Then if it's a provider referral based on certain contraindicators of clinical need. And then you have the one really positive thing is all of this data, once we have consent for the member, now is tied to their claims and could be put into the Milliman risk modeling and compared to, is this having an impact for that individual in mitigating, helping them improve their health situation and lowering the cost to the plan. That's a really critical component. And there are many metric pieces that we have with our plan IT team that can be uploaded to both Springbuck as well as plan IT for that analysis component to it. And then finally, what we need is an approval to initiate the proposal process, confirm with Blue Cross the Thriver screening contribution and a written and final statement of work, and then the confirmation with groups for their participation. We're thinking, we talked about Dunn County and maybe Kildare, since they're close in proximity, it would be the first two groups that we would approach. And then we would set up a communication and scheduling process for all the members once all those decisions were made. Covered a lot of ground in 10 minutes.
But I think it's a great program, and when you're starting a new trust or a new insurance and everything is either online or, I don't want to say not personal, but when you're able to bring people to the people and do this on-site wellness and really show taking a proactive approach in their health and wellness, I think may be very beneficial to all of our members. Yeah, it will be great if you can, as far as put some parameters in place and even the administrators that you're going to have them understand and know that they are a pilot program and where you would be looking for feedback on what went well and what didn't, and being able to provide that type of feedback. So when we do other areas for the program, it would be nice to be able to, make those little tweaks on, what worked and what didn't. So I think this is a great idea. Any board members, do you have any feedback or anything in regards to doing these on-site wellness checks for our members? Any concerns? Okay. Randy, did you have anything else in regards to this piece?
not on the screening, but I have my next slide up on those other items that.
Sure. Do you want to go into that and then we can come back to the new membership parameters?
Oh, okay. Are you okay if I do that then?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I've shared with everybody what we kind of our 4 things that we really tried to hone in with Blue Cross is the Blue Alliance fees, RX rebates, administration fee, and stop loss. That was the topic of our discussion predominantly yesterday. In addition to those other items we discussed. So what I did is I said, okay, it's clear to us, you have no methodology of how you pay these rebates because we've studied it of all of our other groups we have, and I've put it out there in this highlighted area. So we have NDPHIT, Grand Forks is new, Jamestown Public Schools, Dickinson, you can see West Barton, they're all public entities, so it's shared information. You see the enrollment, this is annual enrollment, the Blues fees, I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you have the RX rebates that came to we in 2022 we received a little over $1 million in rebates, and then there's also a medical rebate they provided us. And then we looked at it. Okay, let's look at the Blues PEPM, and then the RX rebate that we're getting. The reason I highlighted yellows because Grand Forks was new, and Blue Cross guaranteed them $70. Angie can attest that. And I was like, are you kidding? Yes, they did. Same thing with West Fargo. They guaranteed them down there at the bottom, they guaranteed them 57. Well, okay. If you do our calculation, we got 2843 PEPM, and we're the largest pool. And they said, well, did you look at all the dynamics of specialty drugs on a relative basis to the groups? And I said, yes, we did. You have no methodology. And they honestly, they looked around to each other like they had no clue what we were saying. And so it's clear to me that they don't understand how their own program works and applies to each group. So I said, well, we're going to bring you the data. And we're gonna sit down and we're gonna figure this out because we should get no less than $70, like Grand Forks is, as a guaranteed rebate per employee per month. And then that's point number 1. Then point number 2, as it relates to the Blues fees. Okay. This was another hot topic because I shared with you, I've been meeting with their consultants about their methodology that they were set up on it. And I just said, your system's broken. And they basically decided it was broken and then realized they actually stopped the program as of November and are not charging us any more fees until July because they're trying to reinstitute, a different system. And to their credit, they actually followed some of the guidelines or some of the ideas I gave them as to what they should do with their providers as to create the incentive structures. It's truly getting aligned more to what's called a total cost of care model. And you have to meet the metric before you get paid the incentive. Well, in any other business, that's what you have to do. You have to actually meet something. And so anyway, so what that did for us is, well, we got a huge windfall out of it. So we projected basically our cost is going to go on our underwriting. We're at $49.94, and our cost in 2023 is going to be $10.94. Well, that was a $1.4 million windfall. That's huge. And that was based on last year's enrollment, not even this year's enrollment, which is how much, it's about 600 more employees. So it could even be larger. Good news is that that's going to be a good benefit for the trust. And each month we'll update that to kind of compare to what it realizes to be, because this is the forecast based on the way that they have restructured it. The other thing we asked Tony yesterday, their chief actuary, was, okay, we need to model it. And so that piece did not get finalized with us. So we have some, again, that's a subsequent meeting. In other words, we have to figure out July going forward, what we underwrite to. Right now, we've underwritten to $10.94. interestingly enough, he's pretty confident there's a lot of providers that not any longer will meet the standard, so they'll get zero of that incentive. Which is again what it should be. So that's that piece of it. The rebate I already shared. If we get the 70 and we're getting 27 now, well, that's another $975,000 back to the trust. The administrative fee. Now, this is a negotiation, but what I'm approaching on is to say, look, we're doing these things as the trust, which you would have done if you were the carrier. So don't charge us for things that you're not doing anymore. And you got this big high fee here, which is the highest out of all the groups. And that's a credit for wellness. It's the NDPHIT administration fees that we just went through on the budget. Those are all things that should be dialed back from their fee, which right now is targeted at $68.40. Okay. Stop loss was the last item. And Tony agreed that based on, we challenged him to go look at the groups that we moved to our RPM strategy. He did. And he said, yeah, we're winning big. And I said, okay, you're winning big. That means we get refunds on premium. So he's agreed that he said, we'll take each group by itself and you tell us the structure of it and the timing of it, and we'll set up a premium refund structure. So my thought is we'll set a target of 60% loss ratio. Any performance we get below the 60%, they will share that refund back to us at a minimum of 10%, but I'm going to actually target 15% of the annual premium that we would like to have as a refund back to the trust. So that could be another $300,000 to $500,000 if we hit that target based on the loss ratio targets that we want to have. So again, I know I covered lots of information. I tried to consolidate because I know we're short on time, but there's a lot of things that we are aggressively trying to get to make sure that's working in the trust favor.
You know, Randy, when I got a chance to look at this from a summary format, this sheet is great to see because it really easily, at least from my standpoint, you're able to look through this and understand, and to see the type of rebate or credit that we can get back to the trust based on discussions and negotiations that you are having with Blue Cross Blue Shield on behalf of the board. I'd like to say thank you for being diligent in working with them and pushing them and looking out for the best interest of the trust. Because when you look at these numbers and these credits, I mean, you're talking well over, I mean, close to what, $3 million in credits back to the trust. And that's by having conversations, asking some of the hard questions, and making Blue Cross Blue Shield more accountable to our plan. So thank you for that.
Well, part of it too is that we're credible with them now. They actually, have a confidence level that we're just not blowing smoke at them. It's like we can show you what's going on, and you have to have a little bit of faith in what we're doing in our process. And honestly, I think yesterday, John and I commented after we left, it's like they actually trust us. And when we say that, it's not just the idea that it's okay, kind of anecdotal, the trust. No, it's like, tell us what we should do. That's a whole different level of trust. And Angie knows, because that wasn't the case, 10 years ago, was it, Angie?
Well, I think the other thing that's integral to that is just they're recognizing that NDPHIT represents their go-to-market strategy, their best way to compete versus NDPHIRS.
Yeah, it is.
Because after they went through the process of bidding for the business and, ultimately were shut down and weren't even viewed as competitive, they're recognizing that the best way for them to adopt more lives and get more lives under their purview is really by expanding NDPHIT and being a true partner in the process.
So, and just one more point to this, and that their conversation yesterday from when Kyle and I met even 2 months ago, that was a little bit, prickly. It was like, no, you guys are important and we're going to make these things work. So.
That's great. That's encouraging to hear.
And I'll just add in real quick too. Thank you, Randy. I know this isn't just a 2-month thing or a 1 meeting thing. You guys have been working on this before even NDPHIT was in existence. So
yeah, you're right.
It's a long-term thing, and yeah, you guys have done an awesome job on this, so thank you.
No, thank you, Brian. That means a lot. Because we are trying really hard.
Well, and I think, I mean, the numbers don't lie. It's proof's in the pudding from that standpoint. So thank you for that update, Randy. I appreciate it. Okay, we only have a few other items on the agenda, and I know our hour meeting is almost going into 2 hours, but one of the things that we have been discussing is new membership parameters. And, you know, talking about what is that minimum threshold of members before we can include them in a group. You know, the Department of Insurance defines a group as 2 or more people. But I know that we've had some struggles with Sanford Health as, you know, getting claims information and being able to look at a small group to find out if they're a good risk or a high risk to bring into the group, but their minimum is 50 lives, which, you know, if you look at a small entity, that's a far cry from where most of them could be. So I don't know if you've made any headway, Randy, on seeing if Sanford will be more cooperative in trying to reduce that number to 50 lives. You know, and what do we as NDPHIT, and maybe that's not a decision we can make today, but I do have some entities who have been inquiring about being able to be part of the trust, but they don't have a large group. And so as a board, helping us determine what is that minimum? Is it 5 people? Is it 8? Is it 10?
Well,
Yeah.
yes, to answer your question is on Sanford, I think I shared maybe I didn't, but we provided language to Kyle to propose for legislation that we want to essentially change the original legislation that we did a couple of years ago to kind of force Sanford to be compliant, because the intent of the original legislation was to disclose it. What we did on this legislation was create the language as a covered entity under which really is related to PHI and HIPAA. So if you're a covered entity and you have a signed agreement for it, because that was their argument, there's no protection. So I said, well, if we're a covered entity, and that's what was put in the legislation. So anyway, that's what we've taken as a step on that piece of it. On the other part, what it really is, boils down to is if we look at a group, and even if they're, say, first of all, as we talked about in the last meeting, the definition of small group is 2 or more. So have to be at least that. Or Blue Cross does not insure them under our stop loss. But if you want to insure these smaller entities like you're describing, then we do get data from Sanford, but we just don't get high cost claimant data. And that could be some of our highest exposure, for a group, because you could be on an orphan drug and be $1 million claimant. And that's important to know if you're only 5 people on your plan. So anyway, that's really where it gets down to. And if they do give us the data on just claims and we don't see any high loss ratio, we kind of can back into it to assume they don't have necessarily high cost claimants, but we're making some assumptions on that component. So I want to be clear on that.
Can I hop in real quick on a question, right? So last time we talked about, the intent of NDPHIT and wanting to help out these smaller groups. Is there a way that we can craft language that says, hey, we'll accept you if you're 2 or more, but we got to get this. If you can't get this, we can't get you in. And that hopefully will put pressure on the group to be able to put pressure on Sanford to say, get them this information. And if we can't get it, we can't underwrite you.
Yeah, in fact, that's kind of what on this next round, based on that last meeting we did have, that's kind of our structure we are going with, Brendan, is to use that as the kind of the pushback. We can do this, but just so you know, this is our limitations. And until you can get it, that high cost claim activity, if it's a risk that we see potentially, then we probably can't underwrite you. And ultimately, that is what we're doing, in lieu of the fact that we don't have the legislative support at this point.
So would we want to consider the definition of our small group that could potentially be eligible to be part of the trust would be based on the definition
Well, I think that was what you said last time, Brandon, was two or if the definition is two or more by the state and the contract, that's what we would adopt is two or more.
Yeah, and then we would just have underwriting parameters that if you can't get that data, we can't underwrite you, so you can't be part of the group. But if you're two or more, you can get that data, then we're good to go. Because that was the concern, right? I mean,
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So if everybody's still comfortable with that, that's kind of our assumption we were going to take on this next underwriting round.
Okay, that sounds good. Board, are you good with that? If we stick with the two or more definition, and as long as we get the claims data necessary to do the underwriting to determine if they're part of the group? Sound good with everyone? Okay, well, Nora, are you still with us?
I am.
Perfect. So I will turn it over to you to review our financials, and then it looks like you're going to visit with us about some money market and CD options, some investment options for the trust.
And the only thing I'm doing for the financials is there's still the November ones, which were presented at the last meeting. However, we were able to get the IBNR number from Mike at Brown & Brown, so that was added to the November financials. We don't have December. There's some closeout stuff that's being worked on yet, so we don't have those yet. And even when we do get the preliminary December ones, we won't have a final December until the actuary calculates the official year-end IBNR that we do at year-end. But so the only change you'll see from the December meeting is the fact that we have changed the IBNR reserve up to $2,272,000, which on the other side, the reserve change adds some expense on the income statement side of about $570,000. So net earnings for November took it down to $747,000, but year to date, we are still in the positive $1,682,000 earnings year to date. And that's, like I said, that's an estimated IBNR. That's the one we got from Mike at Brown & Brown through November. But like I said, we will have a outside actuary doing the December year-end estimation that I'm not sure the timing of it yet. Brandon's going to work with them to do the timing of it because that'll need to be completed before the audit is done. The other item, does anybody have any questions on the updated financials? And I know we have two new board members who are seeing the November ones for the first time, but. Okay. The other item was just the board had discussed maybe potentially not going into necessarily investments yet at this time, just because due to the need of cash flow, things of that nature, not going into full-on investments that, you know, taking some realized losses or anything like that, that would need to be in there long-term until we get more of a surplus built, but maybe looking at doing some things where we can take advantage of these interest rates. Right now, there's higher interest rates for things like CDs, money markets. So went out and got from a couple different places. The first sheet in the attachment that Brenna sent was from First Community Credit Union. If we're thinking about looking at having some funds at more than one entity, you know, First Community Credit Union is another, you know, local North Dakota type based unit. So we looked at them and it's a different type of entity and some of the rates that they have for CDs and money markets currently. The second page is some of the stuff going right on from First International Bank and Trust. They're who we currently SEEK is currently using for the financial institution for the funds money when they switched out of Blue Cross Blue Shield, because they're getting some interest now, actually making that switch a lot more than we were getting at B&D, which was pretty much nothing. But through there too, there's some opportunity to at least capitalize on some of these interest rates for short-term investments that don't have that same risk, but still getting some of those returns, 3% potentially for money market, 4% for some CDs, things of that nature. So it was just because the board had mentioned some things in the past about potentially getting some more interest off of our funds that are just sitting there, bringing you guys that information and seeing what your thought process is on wanting to maybe move potentially some funds into those areas. I know a lot of times as far as like FDIC insurance, like at the credit union, I know it's like a $250,000, you know, without having some separate insurance stuff in place. So I mean, that could be something too, if you want to put, you know, $250,000 into one of those CDs over at First Community Bank and Trust at a 4.5% rate, something like that, just to get a little bit more interest earned on some of these funds that we're holding in deposits. But then I would assume just due to the nature of what we have and we don't know about certain claims yet, money markets are a safe one because you can take them in and out. There's no time constraint either. So
Would we be able to do, say, like, $1 million into the 4.5% at First Community Credit Union, which looks like the highest amount, and that's for 11 months.
The only
And then
thing I would
put
say with
the,
that is then we'd have to make sure that they're gonna be able to put some additional insurance. It caps at 250. Typically, kind of like same with the FDIC insurance, unless they have a program in place to go with insurance. And I know that's what we have done on our side with NDPHIT too. So that would be one thing to consider.
and then leverage that money market for cash flow purposes for the remaining balance. I mean, is that something that's feasible from your and Brenna's standpoint?
I don't know that you'd have to keep some in the operations. You couldn't move everything into a money market and a CD. But we could potentially move some of it. I mean, we haven't touched actually any of the deposits from the members as far as that goes. We haven't had to touch them. I mean, we've gone below in the surplus, but that's because of the liability, and the estimated liability on the books. It's not actually cash flow out.
Well, and it would be interesting to see if there's a tiered approach, and again, I know we're fairly new and it's kind of hard, when we've only been in it for 2 years to really understand what our losses are going to be and what we'll need for operating income. But, being able to look at our investments, our deposits to say, I think we could safely do $500,000 in a 12-month CD, and then maybe another $250,000 in a 6-month or a 3-month, and to be able to tier that. So it's not like we're waiting until 12 months before we get another big lump sum of an investment. So, if we could task you, Nora, and maybe Brenna working together to see what makes sense as far as a safe tiered approach, from the sense of, we want to make sure we have enough operational income to cover our expenses, but what would be a reasonable tiered structure to be able to do some of those investments, and at what dollar amounts? I think that would be helpful to see. Okay. Board members, do you have any comments in regards to that?
I mean, these CD rates are pretty darn good. I mean, I hate, if we feel like we can skim off some, I think we should take advantage of that. That's a lot of money to be made for.
And my thoughts are, even if you guys are okay with it, even kind of like, Brennan mentioned, like even just doing $500,000 in the 11th month one, just because at First Community 4.5 for an 11-month one is, and I feel comfortable saying like $500,000 with what we have in cash reserves. At the end of November, we were looking at how much in cash, over $7 million in cash. So I mean, $500,000 to put an 11-month, and then maybe we do $500,000 into the 6-month one at First International, and then potentially put, feel what we're comfortable putting into the money market then. But the money market is a lot different. You can take that out with need be without any type of penalty, so you don't have to worry about that one as much. What are the
But if you're stating that the deposits, really, we haven't had to dip into those deposits, and you're looking at $3.5 million there, I know you had said 500,000 and 250. But do you think we could look at 750 and 500? Would 1.2 be too much? I know I don't mean to put you on the spot, Nora. I'm sorry.
You kind
As
of
I say,
be
be conservative.
bit.
Yeah, I'm like, be conservative, and then I'm like, well, wait, can we do more? But I mean,
well, and like I said, the one thing I do need to make sure, I want to make sure of with, and I can talk to the contact at First Community, is making sure, because I know with First International, like we have things in place to have that insurance, that FDA insurance, the insurance, since we're over that 250,000, making sure that would translate, or they could put something in place for us to have that same type of insurance over at First Community. Otherwise, I would say we should only max out at the 250 that they have insured. But I mean, that's something that I can ask them about, but I think something you could comfortably do in the beginning is $500,000 at each, $500,000 in the 6-month, $500,000 in the 11-month. And then we can move potentially, $1 million or $2 million into the money market and get that out of there. And we can see how that goes too. And, and watch these rates. I don't know that these rates will go down a ton, but see kind of where our cash flow is at. Watch the cash flow now that we've got, the new members that have come in here January 1, see what the new year is bringing. And we could always potentially do more and time them different, like every few months, go into a different, 6-month CD if it's still at that time frame.
Let's move forward. I like that. I'll make a motion to do that. Where we move forward. Yeah.
Second.
Perfect. Is there a second? Mike, there's a second. All right, yeah. All those who are not in favor of moving forward with this investment option signify by saying aye. All right, we have a unanimous acceptance of moving forward. I would agree with you, Mike. These rates are great. And we need to take advantage of being able to get some return on our investment. So Nora, thank you. Brenna, thank you for looking into that to be able to make some decisions on our investments. Okay, with that, I think that was our last agenda item. So other than our next board meeting, we have scheduled for March 22nd in Bismarck. I have reserved our conference room in the NDACO building on 1661 Capitol Way. We will make sure to get that information out to everyone. Again, a welcome to, is it Sonia or Sonia?
Tanya.
Sonia. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. And Chris, as new board members, we appreciate you being on the board and look forward to seeing you all in March. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting.
All right. Good meeting, Jenny.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.